Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Brian Frank. I'm an industry executive with the manufacturing group here at Autodesk. And I wanted to take some time today to go over some of the trends that are affecting today's manufacturers and driving them to look towards methods and ways to extend the value of the data and the technology that they use to bring products and services to market. We think this is very important here at Autodesk because there are a lot of things that are really starting to come to a head within our industry that is fundamentally going to change the way organizations and corporations leverage and use the data and the tools that they use to create that data to remain competitive and to find advantages in the market. So we wanted to kind of take a little bit of time today to go over a few of these items, a few of these trends, and hopefully spark some thoughts, maybe some conversations inside your organizations, conversations with us here at Autodesk as to how you might be able to look at the way in which you're doing business, leveraging some of the tools and workflows that you've developed, and see if there are ways to optimize the way you're using the data and the tools that you have available to you across your enterprise to drive success in your market. So let's look at a few of the things that we're going to look at today. The first one we're going to talk about is the model-based enterprise and how that's really starting to come into its own as technology matures. The second one we'll take a look at is the challenges posed by the global supply chain that all of us have to take part in. And the third one, which I think is really interesting as well, is the rise of uh, mobile computing and the cloud, and really what that's going to mean for manufacturers. So, these three kind of forces coming together at a head is a bit of a perfect storm where companies are really starting to look back upon themselves and say, are we doing everything that we could with the tools and the data that we have at our fingertips? And often the answer is no, we can do more with it. And so we here at Autodesk think that this is a very powerful, empowering phenomenon, that these kind of three things are really kind of coming together and are really going to fundamentally change the way companies design, market, and manufacture their products and services. So the first one I wanted to talk about is enabling the model-based enterprise, and really what does that mean? So, when 3D parametric modeling kind of first came on the scene, there was a lot of talk of, well, it's going to supplement 2D workflows, and it's going to get rid of drawings and paper-based communications, and that really didn't happen in the beginning. However, like I said before, with the trajectory that technology is on, we're actually starting to see where the model-based enterprise is really starting to come into its own, where 3D data derived from a digital prototype can be used for a whole host of workflows, processes, and goals within inside an organization. And we have today's manufacturers across all industries really looking at how they can maximize the value of the data that they create through the use of digital prototyping. That's everything from generating technical publications and work instructions and work packages through generating um, visualizations, marketing materials, visual communications, a whole host of things that are really driven from the use of a model-based definition of a product. Um, this is really interesting because one of the things that's going on right now is actually the U.S. federal government is looking at enabling uh, its industrial supply base that it uses to provide information not through 2D documentation that's been the case prior, but actually through the use of a 3D model. This is a very important and fundamental change in the way in which um, manufacturers and suppliers communicate with each other. The fact that the model has matured to a point where people trust it, people can use it, and people can leverage it for more than just its first intended purpose is very important. Manufacturers are able today to attach so much information to that model-based definition that can be used in downstream processes. And it really provides a competitive advantage when you look at taking that data and extending it throughout your organization. It really cleans up and clears up the lines of communication. People have a much deeper understanding of what it is you're making, what it is that you're doing, and are able to communicate and collaborate more effectively. So, what are some of the drivers that are making manufacturers kind of look to enable this? Why are they looking to take a model-based definition of a product or a project and figure out how to leverage it throughout the rest of their organization? Well, the first and foremost reason is reducing data duplication. A lot of companies, when they look at what they do internally and look at their workflows, they find that they are constantly remaking data for a new purpose. And we all know that that's not efficient or effective. So, the desire to take that out of the system and make sure that you're only making the data once and that you're leveraging it as many places as possible is really a very strong driver. That coupled with the way in which today's uh, development teams are distributed really requires people to have a good platform for communication and collaboration. And a lot of studies have been done that show that the ability to leverage three-dimensional representations of geometry, attach metadata to that geometry, really help people be able to dive in and understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So as teams become more distributed around the globe and have a number of additional challenges that are presented by that, such as being able to communicate because of language barriers, time shifts, whatever the case might be, that distribution of team really makes it so that um, using the data and the representation of the product as you design it really helps clear up those lines of communication and make those distributed teams more effective. The other driver that a lot of companies are facing is information distribution. And what I mean by that is when you have product data and you kind of look at where all that data goes throughout its life cycle, there's a huge number of customers, if you will, of the data. And so being able to take that data, package it up, have it remain consistent amongst groups who have very different tasks at hand, whether it's somebody down on a shop floor, whether it's an installation or commissioning team in the field, whether it's a warranty team who's coming in and trying to figure out what is wrong with an installation so that they can make a customer happy, whether it's somebody who's looking at focus groups and is this product gonna hit the mark when we go to market. Being able to have a very well-defined product representation that is digital really helps those teams make the most use of the data. And so, being able to distribute that effectively and communicate it effectively is paramount. Error prevention is always a huge one. This kind of goes hand in hand with the data duplication. You know, I think everyone knows that every time you have to duplicate something, that introduces the opportunity to create an error. And errors are expensive, whether they cost you time, whether they cost you material, whether they cost you a lawsuit because something got done incorrectly. Um, Errors are a huge issue, and trying to remove the opportunities to create those errors is very important to today's businesses. You really don't have the time to react to these. Global pressures, competitive pressures mean that you have to get your products to market quickly. You don't have time to make errors. You can't afford to make errors. You can't afford to have customers uh, get things that aren't correct, aren't working properly, and start to damage your reputation. Because with the way today's communications work, everybody's going to know, and they're going to know quickly. So, everybody is looking at, well, how can I remove the risk and remove the possibility of error in my development process, in my manufacturing process? So being able to leverage a single source of truth amongst everybody who needs that data, and to be able to have the processes in place to make sure that that data is validated and verified as it goes forth through the various stages and life cycles of a product's development is very important to today's manufacturers. We talked about it a little bit in the idea of the distributed teams, but enhanced collaboration, even if the teams aren't distributed, is extremely important. Having that single source of truth that we talked about for that product representation, that model-based definition, really allows multifunction teams to communicate more effectively. And when they're able to communicate more effectively, they're able to collaborate more effectively. And so being able to share that information throughout your enterprise and not have to worry about, well, is this the right version? Is this drawing out of date? Having that model-based definition that is synced up, can be verified and said, hey, this is the one that we're working on. This is what we need to concentrate on. We don't have to worry about what's out of sync, what's out of date. Are you working off of revision A while he's working off of revision C? You can start to remove those barriers and enhance the collaboration between your teams. So, leveraging this data across the enterprise and having that model-based definition of a product really allows you to enhance the collaboration between your teams. And the last one is really optimized workflows. So, when you look at a product's development process, there's so many workflows that go into bringing something to market. Um, between the conceptual design, the detailed engineering, the simulation of a product's performance and behavior, these workflows that are paramount to being able to bring something to market really need optimized workflows. You need to be able to take that data, of course, don't duplicate it, use what you've already created, maximize your investment in that data, and optimize how you're going to take that definition from one stage to the next in that product's development. Um, and being able to communicate that back to the rest of the development organization in terms of what are the results that you're finding, what are the decisions that you're making, how do you show somebody what changes might be required or what's being validated is very important. And so being able to optimize the workflows in which groups share that data, optimize the way in which they can get their jobs done, reducing duplication, making sure that the communication is there, that if somebody has selected a material, you're able to understand that material's performances, how it's going to get manufactured, how it's going to get built, what its impacts on that product's sustainability, cost, life cycle might be. Having all that information packaged up and attached to that model-based definition of the product is very important and really allows manufacturers to make the most of their development, research and development time, and the time of their engineers and analysts and manufacturing specialists. So having all this information coordinated, understood, and shared across the enterprise provides a competitive advantage to anybody. And I think the really interesting thing about this model-based enterprise that we see is that it applies to all industries, whether you're making a consumer product or a piece of industrial machinery, whether you're looking at model-based construction workflows that happen if you're a building products manufacturer or a fabricator, but really any of the industries that are involved in manufacturing can leverage the model-based enterprise approach. You can take that data, share it across your different teams, share it with your customers, and really enable a competitive advantage for yourself. So taking this process, this definition, and leveraging it throughout all of the various functions that your organization might have can really produce some really tremendous results. And we've seen a number of customers that as they start to go down this path, they start to see huge returns on the investment because they're reducing data duplication, reducing errors, enabling their teams. They're really starting to find that using model-based data for as many of the processes that they can really provides an advantage to them. And like we said, it's not just in one industry. It's not just in, an industrial machinery customer who's doing packaging systems. It could be somebody who's doing something for the architectural market, somebody who's creating installation instructions for something that goes into a home, and it's something that a novice might take and start to assemble. Leveraging that information allows them to communicate more effectively with the stakeholder, whoever that might be, whether it's somebody internally within your organization or external from your organization. Having that data available enhances your ability to communicate and enhances their ability to understand what that product is supposed to do, at the various stage that they might be looking at. The next one I wanted to talk about was the challenges that manufacturers face with today's global supply chains. No matter who you are in the manufacturing industry, you're part of the global supply chain. Whether you're purchasing from somebody around the globe or you're actually a supplier to somebody from around the globe, you can't get away from the fact that you're part of this global supply chain that we have today. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the news right now as people start to examine Apple Computer and the way their supply chain is set up and all the complexity that they have and how they manage it for maximizing their profitability. So, really supply chain investigation is really on top of everybody's list because there's a lot of advantage that you can come to realize if you can understand what your supply chain looks like and how to fine tune it for sharing information between vendors, between manufacturers, manufacturing sites, and taking advantage of different forces within the market. So I think this is a really important one, and this really speaks to an organization's ability to manage their data. Um, Both sharing that data externally and bringing data internally for use by their development teams. So what are some of the drivers of this? Um, one of the most important ones are the emerging markets. And not just because emerging markets might be where you source something, but also because emerging markets might be the market that you're trying to sell something into. So understanding how you're going to penetrate an emerging market or how you're going to leverage an emerging market to maximize your profitability as you bring something to market is extremely important. And being able to move nimbly and quickly within a market really increases your competitive advantage. So how can you get data in there? How can you pull data out? And how can you use that then throughout the rest of your organization is very important. Competitive sourcing. This is one of the things that we see manufacturers increasingly look at. How can I remain competitive by making sure that I can get the best deal on the components and the materials that I need to bring my products to market? You might be bringing that from an emerging market. You might be getting it right from your backyard. But being able to understand the costs that are associated in your supply chain, what it's going to take to source the materials or components you need to develop your product, and maximize your ability to um, bring that product to market and generate the most amount of profit that you can, and the amount of time that you have to lead that market is extremely important. So manufacturers need to look at what do I need to do to understand um, how I'm gonna manufacture my product. Where do I need to get this stuff from, and what are those decisions? How are those decisions going to influence um, my development and manufacturing of that product? The other one I think is very interesting is the democratization of technology. You have to look at how do you remain competitive. A lot of times what we saw before was that an established economy had an advantage because the workforce in that economy had the ability to leverage technology to kind of keep ahead of some of the emerging markets. However, what we see now is that, you know, the ability for everyone around the globe to leverage technology is really forcing people to understand that they can't use that as just as their own advantage, as their only advantage. You could have somebody spring up in an emerging market tomorrow who has the tools and technology available to compete with you right away. And so understanding within your global supply chain, how do you how can you make use of that to your advantage by, instead of having a competitor, having a partner to help reduce your cost and increase your profitability is very important. And letting uh, kind of sitting back or resting on your laurels and saying, well, we've got an advantage here because we know how to do something that our competitors don't. That's not going to last for a huge amount of time. So you really need to understand, well, what's going to happen when I bring this to market, and who's going to try to start to compete with me quickly because they can, and because they're going to have different variables that affect their cost, and maybe start to provide me more competition than I really want. So how can I take that? How can I turn that from a risk and a threat into something positive for myself? And so a lot of companies are looking at, well, now that these emerging markets are coming forth, how can I take advantage of them? Because they do have the capabilities that some of our mature markets have. The other one I think is always very difficult is kind of consolidation within industries or um, within supply chains. So, a lot of companies look to grow through merger and acquisition, and as they start to do that, and they start to add um, uh, companies into their mix, through a merger, through an acquisition, through a partnership, you bring along their supply chain with you, and understanding how to leverage that and what that means to you is very important. So, if you all of a sudden decide that a company halfway around the world is now going to be part of your organization, what does that mean to you? How are you going to manage that? And how are you going to use that to maybe your advantage too? What are they going to allow you to do that you couldn't do before, from a sourcing perspective, from a manufacturing capability or capacity perspective? Um, what are you going to be able to do with their supply chain to help influence what you've already been doing? And really being able to map that out and make the most out of that investment is extremely important. And of course, time to market. Um, Understanding how your supply chain affects your ability to go to market with the product that you've designed and are starting to manufacture is hugely important. Manufacturers look today and they have such a small window um, to bring something to market and to maximize their profitability. And they really need to understand, what are the risks within their supply chain um, that might prevent them from maximizing their ability to generate profit. Do you have suppliers that are at risk? Are you single sourcing something from a location that's going to cause a problem for you? One of the interesting things that we saw recently was the how the earthquake disaster in Japan really affected the automotive supply chain. Um, it affected the supply chain not just for the Japanese automakers, but throughout the rest of the globe, because so many of the components were single sourced from manufacturers that only had or who were only making those specific components in those areas. And so we saw many of the automakers start to have issues with getting the components they needed to bring their products to market. So understanding, you know, being able to kind of look at the how the bill of materials that you have within your product's design and where you have risk, and understanding how those risks might manifest themselves is very important to any design, engineering, and production manager. So you really want to know, um, where might I have a problem and how do I avoid it? How do I take out that insurance policy? How do I find another vendor who can help supply what I might need? How can I distribute around the globe the sourcing of the components and materials that I might need, so that I don't have a problem as something might happen in a different part of the world. And global communication, I think this is an interesting one too, because and what I mean by this is, the speed of communication that's happening today. You can have members of your supply chain around the world who you can communicate to more effectively than ever. Whether it's through what we talked about before, by enabling kind of your model-based enterprise and being able to communicate what you need in a product, or what you're going to be able to get from somebody to put into your product, or just being able to manage the communication with your suppliers and near real time is a huge advantage. And so, manufacturers are constantly looking at, how can I optimize my supply chain? And a lot of times what they look at is, well, how can I communicate most effectively with my supply chain? And really the infrastructure that has been built out over the last couple of years to help connect the world really has made a difference in the way in which these supply chains operate. So if you kind of step back and just think about it, you can look at, no matter where you are in the world, or who you are in the world of manufacturing, you're part of a global supply chain. Whether you're an OEM and you're sourcing materials from around the world, um, whether you're a supplier that have customers around the world that you provide your components or your materials to, uh, you know, every manufacturer today is part of the global supply chain. And there's really no the idea of being compartmentalized in just one area of the world, I think is really going away quite quickly. There's the world is kind of flattening out, if you will, in terms of how companies are able to communicate with each other to provide each other goods and services. And so, we think this is a good thing. It helps companies remain competitive and bring products to market quickly and be able to generate profit. But really, you need to kind of step back and look at, well, what does my supply chain mean to me? How do I need to share information with them, and how do I need to collect the information that they might have and bring that internally for use by within my organization, by my design and development teams, by my manufacturing and production teams, or even by my servicing and installation teams. How do I make sure that that flow of information happens as seamlessly as possible and as close to real time as possible? As manufacturers start to change their processes and maybe, retire one product and replace it with another one, how do I make sure I know about that and know about it quickly to see if it affects um, my products and what I might bring to market? The last one I wanted to talk about, and I think this one is really exciting, is the rise of mobile and cloud solutions. Now, you might think that this is quite the buzzword, and it is, but there's a reason for it. The rise of mobile computing um, is like something we haven't seen since the explosion of the desktop computer, and it's going to surpass the desktop computer if it hasn't already. And it's really being enabled by a couple things. One is the networks which have been built out to support those devices, and then the cloud solutions behind those, um, on top of those networks that really provide the services to these devices, whether it's data sharing, whether it's computation, whether it's um, collaboration platforms, whatever the case might be. Really, these kind of two things are going hand in hand, and it's a really exciting time to be involved in technology because, things are changing rapidly every day, and we're seeing people be able to look at what do these solutions offer us, and how can we maximize um, their their potential within our organization, and it's quite astounding. So the first thing I wanted to share was just a little view in terms of where computing devices are heading. And we can kind of look here, at the history of computing assets and just the number of units that are available. As you go from a mainframe to a mini computer to the PC, the explosion of the PC that was enabled by the desktop internet, and now what's going to happen as the mobile internet takes hold, and just the number and kinds of units that are going to be available at the fingertips of everyone, both your customers, your development staff, people within your company. So really, looking at how do we maximize the potential of all of these devices that are going to be sitting in the hands of all these people is really quite an interesting problem to try to look at. And every manufacturer, if they haven't already, are starting to kind of sit back and look and say, well, what are we going to do um, with all this technology? How can we most effectively use this to help our organization and to provide us a competitive advantage? And on top of the explosion of the devices, you also have the idea of the cloud and what that brings to what that offers. Everything from infinite computing to infinite storage, the ability to leverage cloud-based services to enable an organization is something like we've never seen before. The cost of computing is coming down considerably, and the potential that you have in leveraging cloud-based solutions is is really unheard of. But it's a challenge because customers have to sit back and or organizations have to sit back and look at themselves and say, well, what's the best way in which we can use this? How do we make it so it's not just a buzzword, but it's really something that's transformative within our business? And there's a number of drivers to this. Um, the first one is working patterns. We're seeing as the rise of these technologies evolve, and also the generational shift in terms of who's in the company. We have a workforce that is both sunsetting or retiring, and we have a new force coming on, and they have very different perspectives in terms of how they work and how they want to work. Today's college graduate doesn't want to be chained to his desk. He wants to be able to move around, and he wants to be able to do his job where he wants to do his job from. And being able to enable that and create that happy worker, that empowered worker who's going to be able to use technology to his advantage, gives you amazing returns. If you can find a way to allow that worker to remain happy and productive, and allow them to kind of work in the the paradigm that they've grown up in, with the idea of having a mobile device and being able to access data anywhere and anywhere, is really something that everyone has to kind of sit back and think about and understand. Well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to allow people to use the technology that's coming to market, and how are we going to allow them to make the most of it and really adapt to the way in which they want to work, instead of forcing them to work in a certain manner, which is going to inhibit their productivity and their happiness. We talked about a little bit before the idea of distributed teams. Development teams are no longer all sequestered in a room together. They're spread out across the globe. And not only are they spread out across the globe, but they're probably also doing more than one thing at once. And so how do you enable them to communicate effectively? Well, a lot of times it's because they're able to remain always connected. I think every manager has the dream of their employee working 24 hours around the clock, and we know that's not healthy. But the idea to say that you're not going to miss out on something because you're on a plane, or you're on a vacation, or you're sitting at home on your couch, and a decision needs to be made, or you want to be able to sit there and start thinking about what you're going to do the next day, or you want to be able to capture an idea as it comes to you, and being able to use a mobile device to help you do that is really powerful. And so, at Autodesk, we're always constantly looking at this kind of sea of change, if you will, and how we can enable people to capture their creativity, allow them to work on their designs when they want to, when they feel that inspiration, instead of trying to schedule inspiration between 9 and 5. How do we enable somebody to capture their idea, or take that inspiration and go ahead and create something wonderful at that time? And one of the ways we see that happening is by enabling that user with cloud and mobile solutions. Of course, one that you always hear about a lot is the IT and infrastructure costs that are associated with today's computing. So, you know, organizations are looking at cloud-based solutions because they provide such an advantage in terms of the cost to the organization. And so how can we make use of those most effectively? And, I think looking at how that can be used by design and engineering and manufacturing and production teams is a real interesting area of exploration that a lot of manufacturers are going through. Um, a lot of them are taking some very deliberate steps in terms of understanding what it means to the safety and security of their data, and we fully support that, but what we do think is that the way in which data is shared is really going to be enabled through the use of cloud-based collaboration platforms. And so, inside your organization, if you start to think now of, well, how would I most effectively do that, and what are the concerns that I have, and how do I have to meet those concerns and overcome them, is really something that's going to take a little bit of time. And a lot of customers are starting to do that now, because these things are going to come to fruition. An interesting thing too is, I've got a picture on this slide here of the nice white puffy cloud, and actually it's not my first choice. Whenever I talk about cloud, I like to put in storm clouds, because I think there's so much power and there's so much potential within the cloud-based environment that can be used by an organization. So I often think that the puffy white cloud is really not the right image to convey what the cloud actually means. We talked a little bit before in terms of working patterns, but generational shifts in the workforce. Um, we have a workforce that's coming on who's grown up with video games, have grown up online with the internet, and they have a different set of expectations in terms of how they're going to work, how they're going to communicate, and what their tools and their technology are going to do for them. And so, it's very important to kind of look at your workforce, and as it both matures and kind of renews, understanding what that really means for you. What are you going to have to do to keep that workforce productive, keep them happy, keep them competitive, and really be able to attract the best talent to your organization? And what are their expectations going to be? You know, what are they going to want to use as their main method for designing or engineering something, and how can you enable them through this new technology to be the most productive that they can? And of course, capacity and capability. Um, you know, the rise of the cloud really provides the ability to do a whole lot of things that you couldn't do before. Whether that's using the idea of that infinite computing, or being able to have solutions in place that are going to answer questions that you couldn't answer in an effective manner before, or whether it's being able to open up um, the data that you have within your organization to people throughout your enterprise and through your customer base and everywhere else. There are really some fundamental changes that these technologies start to bring to your organization. You really got to sit back and think, well, how can I most effectively use this? How can I increase my capability, increase my capacity to compute things? How can I leverage this most effectively to create a competitive advantage for myself? And I think the last one, which is probably the most important, is the idea of ownership and access. Um, Throughout the uh, the technology community, the idea of ownership and access, the traditional view of what that meant is really being challenged by these technologies. What does it mean um, to use software today and to use technology? Um, are there more effective means and both in cost and both in what we talked about before between capacity and capability? Are there ways in which I can get to the data or get to the technology to work on the data more effectively and more cost effectively? So I think ownership and access models are being challenged, and organizations need to kind of step back and make sure they understand what those challenges are going to be and how they're going to be able to make use of them. So, we talked about really three things: the model-based enterprise and really what that means. What does it mean to have a model-based definition of a product, and how can you leverage that throughout your organization? How can you most effectively leverage the global supply chain that you're part of, whether you're an OEM or a supplier? And how do you need to manage the information that flows between you and the rest of your partners in that supply chain? And how do you make use of the rise of mobile computing and cloud-based solutions? And really these kind of three things, I think, allow you to build tomorrow's manufacturing enterprise. If you understand the value of the data and the value of the technology that you have and how you can extend those, make the most out of them, look at the investment that you've made and maximize it throughout all of the different functional departments and organizations within your company. I think you'll find that there's a lot of potential. Um, I don't think any company or any organization or any enterprise can sit back and say, we've cracked it. That's it. There's no more room for improvement. I think everybody is looking both internally and externally on what can we do better, because there's always something that you can do better. There's always a new technology that you might not have implemented. There's always a new methodology that you might not be using. And so, what I'd like to hopefully leave you with is the idea that, maybe there are some areas that we need to start to explore within our own organization, and how we might maximize our investments that we are already making, and in both the technology, the tools, and the data that we're generating. And that's something that we at Autodesk are extremely passionate about, and we'd love to help you with that. So I guess the thing that I'd like to challenge everybody is, find your Autodesk partner, or and ask us to come and help you figure out, have you made the most of the data and the technology that you have today? Are there things that you could do that would help create a competitive advantage for you? Are there things that you could do that would help optimize the way data flows through your organization? We'd be happy to help look and find out if there's steps that could be taken, or things that could be done to help create a competitive advantage for you. And so I'd like to leave you with just one thought, which is, you know, Autodesk has probably the most comprehensive portfolio of solutions for any industry, no matter what industry you're part of. We've probably got the workflow and the solution for you. And we'd love to be challenged to come in and show you how you can enable those things across your enterprise, across your organization, and throughout your supply chain. So reach out to your Autodesk partner, ask them to come in and help you. Ask a few of those questions. How are we leveraging a model-based enterprise? Are we doing everything that we could or should? How are we working with our supply chain? Are there things that we could do better? And are we making the most use of disruptive technologies as they start to come to market? Are we using mobile and cloud-based solutions the way in which we should? We'd love to provide some advice, hopefully jointly discover with you things that can make you more competitive. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much. If you have any questions, please reach out to your Autodesk representative. We'd love to help you.